All right, we are in Lake County, California, where there's been some large fires in the last few years. As you can see, all the trees here are charred, and there's a whole bunch of charcoal all over the place. Look here on the ground, just random piles of charcoal everywhere. So we're going to do a little experiment here today and see how much charcoal I can pick up in maybe 15 minutes or something like that. This is like free biochar. Thousands and thousands of acres out here of burned land where there's just charcoal sitting on the ground that you could pick up. Now, since this is a fire ecology, you'd kind of think that over the eons, a large amount of charcoal would collect here or kind of make its way into the soil. That's kind of an interesting question. Wonder, how much that's been studied. But my guess is that it's not having like a huge kind of effect because most of the wood that burns up here doesn't make charcoal. It either doesn't burn all the way or it burns all the way to ash. So we're going to find a lot of pieces of wood that are charred and they have kind of maybe some charcoal on the outside, but they're still not burned all the way. But most of it is burned down to ash, which feeds the forest, but in a short term. Like those, it's like a heavy, quick nutrient release, so it's a totally different effect than charcoal. But my guess is that even though this has been going on for thousands or millions of years in this area, that there's not some large amount of charcoal collected as a percentage in the soil that's enough to make a huge difference. We're looking at probably 2.5% or higher to have like a large impact. But let's do that experiment. But first, this Sweet 16 apple that I'm eating is amazing. It tastes like almost like a cinnamon cherry candy, and this one's just perfectly ripe. This is an amazing apple. This year it's been really, really good. I've been feeding it to a lot of people and getting their response, and everyone's pretty amazed at the flavor. Right now my brain is like, definitely this apple and Wixen need to be crossed and bred with. So that's one of the main crosses I'm doing this year is Sweet 16 and Wixen. Okay, we're gonna start at 1250 and go to 105. Let's go. Now I'm just not gonna sit here and just pick up right here. I'm gonna walk around and see if we can find spots that maybe have more, that's easier to pick up, just kind of see what's around, But this is nice stuff. It's a little hard to pick up without getting a bunch of pine needles. So to do a 100 square foot bed, I would need about 10 cubic feet of this, which, is going to take a while to pick up, but you don't have to pay for it and you don't have to make it. Now there's some people that argue this isn't biochar, it's not superior, the best charcoal. I'm kind of like, who cares? It'll work. It may not work as well as charcoal that's burned in a retort or something like that, but yeah. So what? It's free. Choose more of it. It either works or it doesn't. Don't take anyone's word for it. Test it yourself. Set up some trial beds where you can really compare it directly to areas that have no charcoal. Just remember that things won't grow well the first year with raw charcoal buried in the ground. I have a lot of biochar and a lot more stuff I need to burn to make more. So I'm not highly incentivized to like come out here and just collect this stuff. But it seems like it could be totally worth it just coming out here for a couple of days camping and just collecting bags and bags of this stuff. Here's some, looks like this was rotten wood or maybe bark. It's crushing all the way up, so it's charred all the way. And then over here, you can see there was a tree going all the way over there to that hole where the stump was, and the stump burned out. But all along here, there's just a lot of charcoal. See, here's part of the trunk of that tree. And that's not quite charred all the way. Maybe I'll leave that stuff. I was saying that to do a 100 square foot bed, amended at 10% charcoal, which is what I've been using at home. It seems to work at my house with the charcoal I've been using. Then you need 10 cubic feet of charcoal, which is quite a bit. It's 2.5 standard wheelbarrows full. Most of my wheelbarrows are around 30 gallons, which is like 4 cubic feet. If you're interested in biochar and amending your gardens, it's hard to come out here and see this and not want to just spend some time picking it up. You see some pieces like this that are still woody inside. I don't want to get those today. Sure, they're fine. I want the charcoal. Some pine cone, carbonized. That's what's making that sound, is those pine cone scales. Yeah, God, I just love the sound of these. I want to record that. Collect a bunch of these charred pine cone scales. Listen to this. So obviously if you went out of your way to pick up all of this stuff, it's a lot, but it's just too hard to pick it all up. You just got to go for the big pieces. Tons of pine cones burned here. And here's the stump of that tree. Obviously the tree was here and the stump completely burned out, all the roots and everything. And then the tree was laying out this way. Another burned out stump hole. Here's some good stuff, but it's not completely burned up, so I need to kind of knock it around a little bit and just get off the stuff that's completely charred. We have a couple minutes left of our 15 minutes. Now, if you didn't mind having a bunch of pine needles and dirt, you could do this a lot faster. And I don't think you should really mind. I'm just trying to see how much charcoal I can pick up. So I can get this before the alarm goes off. Okay, that's it. Our alarm's about to go off here, so I'm gonna guess that's more than half a cubic foot. But maybe a conservative estimate would be a half hour for a cubic foot. I'm gonna guess it's really more like 20-25 minutes, but let's say half hour. So 2 cubic feet an hour. That's a lot, 5 hours to do 100 square feet, but it's permanent, so. So maybe I'll measure that later. Also, when I crush it, it's gonna take up less space, but I'm guessing it's a half cubic foot. So a cubic foot every half hour, 2 cubic feet an hour, 5 hours for 10 cubic feet to do a 100 square foot bed amended to 12 inches deep with 10% char. That's quite a bit of time, but it's time well spent hanging out in the woods. You don't have to make it. You don't have to collect the wood. You don't have to bring the wood to a site in order to burn it. It's light work. It might work out, could be worth it. That's for anyone else to decide. Maybe I'll measure that a little more closely when I get home. All right, I'm back home, obviously. I'm gonna measure this. I put it on this board and walked it down. You catch some air. You want to breathe that stuff. Oh, this charcoal here was tracked with a machine. I don't know what you call it, a track hoe or something. Little miniature excavator. That was pretty cool. It crushed it up really fast. I tried driving on it with the truck, and it's just, with the narrow tires, it's really hard to... If it was out in the open, it would be easier. I prefer to handle this stuff when it's damp, and it doesn't really do this very much, but I do a lot of this when it's dry, like shovel a little and then run away and breathe for a minute. So we're about 1.5 inches below this line right here. Okay, we're gonna do this the hard way here. So this is either 14 or 15 quarts. 12 quarts is 3 gallons, so 3.5 to 3 3/4 gallons. I just miscounted. I may have miscounted by 1 quart. There's 7.5 roughly gallons in a cubic foot, so we're right at about half a cubic foot. So if I were amending this bed, this blocked off area right here is how much I could do with this charcoal right here. If I were going to 10%, it's 5 square feet, which means that it's 5 cubic feet down to 12 inches, and at 10%, that's a half cubic foot of charcoal. So That's not a very big area, but keep in mind that's permanently amended, and this was only 15 minutes to pick up, probably 2 or 3 minutes to crush on a board under my feet, and then, of course, putting it into the soil. So I don't think, though, it's too bad. If I spend an hour at that rate, which we're going to talk about in a second, I could do an area. This would be an hour, and the whole bed would be about 3 hours worth of picking up charcoal, 10 or 15 minutes crushing it under your feet, even if you didn't have any kind of crusher, just on a piece of plywood, which I think that's pretty good. You could also sift it and then kind of recrush the biggest pieces with your feet, but I would probably just use it that way. So when I was editing the footage for this, I had some ideas. I think that, first of all, it's not necessary at all to be uptight about getting dirt and rocks. For me, it was about how much charcoal could I pick up. But I think a better test would have been to try some different methods of picking it up and then sort it out for just the charcoal, like get out the pine needles, get out the rocks and dirt, and then see how much I could get. Because I'm sure I could go much faster, probably at least twice as fast. And this is how I think I would do it. I would take, first of all, I think you have to go the first year, maybe the second year, but this is like the first year after the fire, and there's already tons of pine needles on top of the charcoal. So that's only going to get worse. And, obviously it's just going to get harder the longer you wait. So I would probably ideally take 2 rakes. One would be like a small hand rake, basically like a leaf rake, which has the real flexible spring-like things, or they used to make them out of bamboo a lot, and kind of just quickly rake off the pine needles, but you could also use your fingers, and then come along with maybe a bigger rake and rake the charcoal into piles. Not a huge rake, but like with a long handle, but maybe like a small leaf rake on a long handle. Rake that stuff up in piles, and then scoop it, maybe even with a shovel, into a container. So I think you're going to at least double the amount you could get, probably even quite a bit more than that. And one way to get the rocks out, if you care, and you may not care or may not need to care, would be to just mix it in water. And I've done this before when I have a whole bunch of dirt and rocks. I'll just mix it in water, and then all the rocks and dirt fall to the bottom, and you just scoop the charcoal off the top and keep throwing more. Just make sure you have enough room in the tub that the charcoal can float and the rocks can sink easily. So I've done that before. It's real easy. The pine needles I just don't think would be a big deal. Not only do I think it'd be easy to get them out, but I think you could just leave them. I mean, what does it matter, really? And some people are paranoid about pine needles in their garden, like being too toxic or too acidic or something. Don't worry about that. It's just not that much. I've used pine needles in my garden and compost, and it's just not a big deal. I think that's pretty lucrative. I mean, you have to think that you don't have to burn it or collect the material or anything. You just go out and follow the charcoal around, and all you have to do is carry it back to your vehicle or whatever. So kind of a cool experiment, and that's all I have to say about that. Bite me. This apple's really good. It's a very polite, mild apple, but it has this like depth and richness of this certain flavor. And I was thinking again, Adam of Adam's Apples has called the flavor of Wixon, malt, or said, named that as a flavor component. And I think that is the closest thing to describe this flavor, which, comes from that Wixon line or from crab apples in general. And this has a lot of it at its best. Like right now, they're pretty much peaking, and they don't hold the flavor, and they don't have a lot of it before they're ripe. It's like a brief seasoned dessert apple. Some apples will hold their flavor or change in flavor or improve in flavor as they sit in storage, but this really doesn't. It doesn't hold up that well in storage. But I think that probably is the closest component. If you don't follow Adam, if you're interested in apples and don't follow Adam on Adam's Apples, go check him out. It's a really cool website where he just does apple reviews and he rates them by stars and stuff. And he's got a much more sophisticated palate than I do in terms of like describing flavors, more like a wine taster or something. But I think that's probably the closest thing. It actually is malty. And I don't think that's the only thing. It's not like a dead ringer for malt. It may just be a malt component with another group of stuff. But this is kind of a one-dimensional apple in a way because it's not really complex. It's like that's what it has. It's a low-acid apple. It's very sweet, and it has that richness thing that comes up in the beginning, and then it tapers off, you know, pretty fast. And then you want more. Like you're like, what was that flavor? Like what is that? And then it's like already fading, and so you want to just keep eating it. It's like you want to chase this mysterious flavor that you can't quite, you know, tie down. If someone tells you in a forum or something that you can't grow apples from seed or they're going to be crappy, send them to skillcult.com/bite me. I'm out here in the forest, like way out in the mountains, and I found an old homestead site. You see that tree right in front there? That's a old pear tree. It's probably a Bartlett, but I took cuttings just in case. I'll graft them out and see what they grow out to be. But usually on these old homesteads around here, what you find is Bartletts because they're resistant to fire blight, so they survive, and they're real long-lived trees, and they were just planted. You know, they're the main pear that was planted as a homestead pear. Anyway, there's also an apple tree. It's small diameter, like maybe 4 or 5 inches at the base, and I'm guessing it's a seedling. There's only 2 apples on it. So I have my handy dandy long reach pruner here. This is I think it's an ARS. This thing's awesome. It telescopes out to 10 feet. And actually one of these looks greener than the other one. So we'll just take one. Missed it. Yeah, chances are this is a seedling apple. I mean, it's always possible that it was planted right here and it keeps dying and regrowing, but if it was ever grafted, it's probably either rootstock sucker or it's a seedling from. No doubt there were many fruit trees out here at some point. Right now there's only a walnut tree out there and a pear tree. Big green apple. A common apple that was planted back then was Rhode Island greening. Could be a seedling of that. Water core. Kind of mealy, green apple flavor. It tastes like green apple candy. Nothing to write home about, but it's actually ripe. So it could be Rhode Island greening or Rhode Island greening seedling.